everyone. Welcome to my channel. My name is Lisa Alistway, and on this channel, you will find a variety of inspirational and informational videos. So if that sounds good to you and you haven't subscribed, please subscribe. My guest today is Jerry Brainum. Anyone who has read bodybuilding magazines over the past 40 years will likely recognize his name. He was the science editor of Muscle and Fitness magazine for 10 years, editor-at-large at Flex magazine for 8 years, and most recently was the science editor of Planet Muscle magazine. He has published over 5,000 magazine articles. He's written for Men's Fitness magazine, Sports Fitness magazine, Muscular Development magazine, Muscle Mag International, and was a regular contributor to Ironman magazine for 28 years. Besides his writing, he was a competitive bodybuilder during the 1970s and has been a nutrition consultant for numerous elite world-class athletes. He is also the author of an ebook for drug-free bodybuilders called Natural Anabolics. Finally, he is the creator of Applied Metabolics, which is an in-depth newsletter about food supplements, exercise science, steroids, and much more. I will be linking his website down below in the description box for your reference. Welcome, Jerry.
Nice to be here. Nice to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
Oh, I'm so honored to have you on my channel today. You are quite the bodybuilder encyclopedia, so I'm super excited to interview you.
Sure.
Ask
awesome. Anything.
Awesome. Okay, so I had mentioned in the bio that you were a competitive professional bodybuilder in the 1970s alongside Arnold Schwarzenegger and during that golden era of bodybuilding. Can you share a little bit about your mindset as a professional bodybuilder? Because I know in a previous interview that you were a natural bodybuilder, and I know a lot of bodybuilders have to weigh the risk and the benefits when they go into professional bodybuilding. So what was your mindset with all of that when you were doing it?
Okay, first let me correct you on one item. I was never a professional.
Okay, competitive.
Yeah, I was a competitive bodybuilder, not professional. And it ties in with what you're asking me, the reason why I never turned professional, because my mindset, I started exercising when I was 11, but I did freehand body weight stuff like chins and dips and stuff. And then I graduated to weights when I joined the local community center at age 12. I sent away for courses from a famous bodybuilder named Bill Pearl, who just passed away recently at 91 years of age. He was my early idol, if you want to call it, bodybuilding. And then I got into working out. Now, an interesting part that I have to tell you is my original impetus to get involved in lifting weights was, I don't know why, I can't explain why, but I was always health-minded right from the start. I started out as a swimmer. That was my sport before I became a bodybuilder. And I was always interested in health, and I reasoned in my 12-year-old mind that having muscles would make you healthier and possibly make you live longer. This is my thought. Now, most 12-year-olds don't think like that, but I did. So my original, motivation was health. So I lifted weights. I started with a whole body system 3 times a week. And then eventually, after 2 years, I decided that maybe I'll put my foot in the water and, get into they had teenage bodybuilding contests. I was living back in New York, but from reading the bodybuilding magazines, it seemed that most of the top bodybuilders were training more often than 3 times a week, 4 to 6 times a week. And the place that I was working out was only open 3 times a week. So what I did is, as a kid, I took a subway train to Manhattan. I looked at a couple of gyms, and I finally settled at one called Mid-City Health Club, which I joined at, by this time I was 14 years old. I joined there and I started training 6 times a week. I would go there as soon as I finished school. I'd get on the subway and go right to the gym. I had no social life as a teenager, other kids hanging out. I spent it all in gyms. I mean, I'm telling you, I didn't hang out with anybody. The people I socialized with were adults. I was this young guy in the gym, and the gym where I trained, half of the guys were from Puerto Rico. They didn't even speak English. But anyway, that's how I started. To make a long story short, I competed. I won a couple of teenage shows on the East Coast. And then I moved to California at the age of 18 to go to college. And I knew I was going to go to college. And I figured, since I can go to college in New York or California, California was called the Mecca of bodybuilding. This is where all some of the top bodybuilders, the more glamorous type bodybuilders, want to call it that, the guys with the golden tans who ran along the beach. I wanted to go out there, and I joined a famous gym called Vince's Gym. It was run by a kind of eccentric character named Vince Garanda, who was extremely knowledgeable. Very hard guy to get along, very irascible. I got along very well with him. Again, shortening the story a little bit, I won a couple of teenage shows and regular shows as an amateur, and I had to make it. I got to the point where I had to make a decision whether I wanted to continue in bodybuilding, possibly to a professional level. I wasn't sure if I had the genetic ability to be a successful professional, because a large part of success in bodybuilding as a professional requires a certain level of genetics. If you don't have it, there's nothing you could do, that you just won't make the top echelon. So, but more importantly, steroids were being used fairly commonly by most competitive. I competed in one show, I remember, where it was only me out of 40 contestants, only me and one other guy was drug free. Everybody on the contest, I still managed to place third with no drugs, and I competed against all the. But I was beaten by guys. I looked at the two guys who beat me, and I said to myself, if I were taking drugs, I'd be 20 pounds heavy. I would have slaughtered these guys, And so I had to make the decision to either take steroids and go on to, maybe possibly a professional, or just continue to work out and stop competing. And I thought about my original motivation to get into bodybuilding was health. And I also had this concern because I knew that one of the side effects of steroids was that it caused male pattern baldness. If you had the genes for male pattern baldness, taking steroids, even in low amounts, would bring it out. And I saw a couple of guys my age, I was only in my early 20s, who already had thinning hair or were bald. And I just didn't, we're talking about the 70s, where guys were walking around, like the rock stars with shoulder length hair. And women were always talking about how they love the guys with long hair. And I said, I looked at my grandfathers, both on both sides were bald by the time they were 30. I knew that I had the genetic predisposition for male. And I said to myself, and I weighed the possible rewards of turning pro. First of all, I'd be risking my health. There wasn't big money involved, only maybe a handful of bodybuilders were able to make a living at all. And, and then the male pattern baldness, that sealed the deal for me. I said, you know what, I'm just going to continue to train. And that's when I stopped competing, and I never competed again. And honestly, I've never had any desire to return to competition. I train, if you see me in the gym, I train as hard as most competitive bodybuilders, even at my age, but I have no desire for a number of reasons. I don't like the way bodybuilding is run today. I think there's a lot of bad judging involved. The direction that the sport has gone in is anathema to me. It's nothing that I'm interested in. In fact, I used to be a fan. Even when I stopped competing, I would go to, I was writing for the magazines, so I'd have to attend the bodybuilding shows because I'd write about the competitors and the contests. But, once I stopped writing for the magazines and the bodybuilders started to change their appearance to get this gargantuan appearance that I couldn't relate to at all. I come from an era when symmetry and proportion were paramount. In other words, you had to have a very well-balanced, good-looking body that even people that didn't work out would say, well, that guy's really well built. Today, nobody could relate to the guys who compete today. And so I actually, frankly, lost interest in bodybuilding competition. I don't even look at it. I mean, I see it on Facebook and, some of the social media, but I have zero interest in bodybuilding contests. None. I don't care about Mr. Olympia. I don't watch it. I just have no interest in it. And again, it's nothing personal. I don't know any of the new guys. When I wrote for the magazines, I knew every pro bodybuilder. I interviewed them all. They all knew me. I knew the female bodybuilders. Everybody knew me because I worked for major magazines. Today, it's been over 25 years. The new guys and the new women, they don't know me from Adam. So, that's the way it is. But more power to them. Don't get me wrong. I mean, personally, I think a lot of these people are terribly risking their health, because I did study a lot about the biochemistry as the so-called PEDs, the steroids, and the growth hormone. And, the dosages and the programs these people are using, let me put it this way, they're shortening their lives, and they're terribly risking their health, terribly.
Yes.
So,
yes. So can I just back up a little bit? So when talking about bodybuilding, there's like the bronze era, I guess the golden era, and now the era that we're in now is called the monster era. Did I miss any eras?
No, you got it right. I guess the Bronze Era, I'm not sure what that refers to. It could be the beginning of bodybuilding. You got to go way back for that. For that, you'd have to go to a guy named Eugene Sandow. He was born in 1867 and he died in 1926, I believe. Interesting story how he died. He was an older man in his late 50s. He was driving this big car. He was also a strong man. He wasn't just didn't have muscle. He was one of the better built. He comes from an era of strong men. In other words, in those days, there was no bodybuilders. There were just strong men. The object was to lift as heavy weight as possible. However, some of the men were not only strong, they were actually extremely well built. They looked like bodybuilders. Eugene Sandow was the best of them. Anyway, he was older man. He's trying to, his car got stuck in mud. He was trying to lift the car out of the mud.
Wow.
And supposedly this caused something to rupture in his body and he died, and that could be, it's hard to say if there's any truth to that, but he was the first bodybuilder. So like I said, you have these strong men. It was mostly strong men. They were, one arm lifts, all these lifts that aren't done anymore. And some of them just maybe because of genetics or whatever, they were, you look at them, they were extremely well built. They weren't very big. None of them were big. This is way before they had drugs. There was no drugs in This is all natural. But some of them, if you look at the photos, they're extremely impressive and they look like bodybuilders. Some of the others, some of the guys, like there was one guy who was a very, very strong guy from Canada named Louis Cyr, one of the strongest of the strong. I mean, this guy was ridiculously strong. He was heavy. He was a big kind of fat guy, but he had enormous strength. But a lot of, like I say, a lot of the other guys like Eugene Sandow, he's considered the archetypical bodybuilder. He's considered the first real bodybuilder because of his physique. In fact, the trophy that they give out each year to Mr. Olympia is a small statue of Eugene Sandow.
Oh, fantastic. So when did the drugs, the steroids and the performance enhancing drugs, when did that all kind of begin and start to infiltrate the bodybuilding world?
Okay, that's a good question because it's very controversial. I've gotten arguments with people online because, continuing a little bit, I have to add a little bit to what I just said. You could say the Bronze Era or continued all the way into the 40s and 50s. We had guys like Reg Park and Steve Reeves, big guys. They were drug-free. Now, the controversies involved because testosterone itself was isolated originally. I mean, they saw signs way back to the early 1860s of the effect of testosterone in male animals, castrated animals, blah, blah, blah. But it was actually isolated from bulls in 1935, and then it was synthesized right around the same time by 3 different German scientists. So the thing is, a lot of the people will read that, and they'll look at bodybuilders from the 40s who had impressive physiques, like Reg Park he played Hercules in the movie, tremendous muscle. It was one of the first men to bench press 500 pounds, strong and big. I knew Reg personally, by the way. Then there was Steve Reeves, incredibly handsome guy who won the Mr. American 1947. He went on, also played Hercules in the movies. He was 1959. He was the #1 movie star in the world, believe it or not. And, they look at these guys' physiques and they say the reason, well, if testosterone was synthesized in 1935 and these guys were competing in the 40s and 50s, they must have taken steroids to get that size. Now, here's where they go wrong. The notion that steroids build muscle wasn't really known back then. And the first use of steroids, if you want to actually testosterone, that was the first one. The first medical use of testosterone was around 1941, and it was to treat male depression, nothing to do with muscles. The first suggestion that testosterone can help build muscles and increase athletic ability came with the publication of a book in 1945. It was just a suggestion. It was a hypothesis. You have to understand, nobody was using it yet. Testosterone was expensive and it was hard to get back then. You just get it it was very difficult. Nobody was on it. The widespread use of testosterone, you could say, began with the Soviet Olympic weightlifters in the early 50s. Around 1954, there was an American doctor who went over to the World Weightlifting Championships. He was speaking to the coach of the Soviet, it was then called Soviet weightlifting team, Olympic lifter. And I guess they got a little drunk, and the coach of the Soviet weightlifting inadvertently spilled the beans that,
Mhm.
Russian weightlifters were taking testosterone. That's, they were doing very well in competition. So anyway, this guy went back to the United States and he worked with a company called SIBA. They had steroid chemists there. He's wrongly credited with developing this drug called Dianabol, generic name methandrostenolone. He didn't actually develop it. He basically kind of whispered in the ear of SIBA, and he pointed out that, as a form of testosterone, it's basically synthetic, structurally changed testosterone in oral form. It
Mhm.
can be used medically, and that's what SIBA was interested. They don't care about building big muscles. Anyway, he advised a couple of American weightlifters to take 2 tablets. Make a long story short, they thinking if 2 tablets work, 4 would work better. They started abusing it. He got disgusted. He disavowed himself completely about steroids. He went on to become a person who voiced tremendous sentiments against steroid use.
Mhm.
What do they call that? I can't remember the term, but anyway, he completely reversed 360 degrees. But if in terms of bodybuilding, when did steroids first become prevalent bodybuilding? That would be around the time of the 1964 Olympics that were held in Tokyo. That's when bodybuilders, actually a little bit earlier than that, this same bodybuilder I mentioned earlier, Bill Pearl, for example, he had a gym in Sacramento. His gym was near a major college school of a veterinary college, and one of the people training his gym was a veterinarian researcher. And he mentioned to Bill Pearl that they were giving a new drug to animals, and it was greatly increasing their muscle mass. It was called Nilevar. And he said, he told Bill Pearl that, there doesn't seem to be a lot of side effects. So Bill Pearl tried it back in 1959. This is right when steroids first came out. They came out, actually, the synthetic versions of testosterone were developed mostly in the early 50s. There was thousands of them developed. Only a couple of them got on the market. Dianabol was one of them.
Mhm.
Nilevar was not a commercial steroid, but Bill Pearl got a hold of it. And if you look at photos of Bill Pearl taken between 1959 and 1961, when he won his second Miss Universe title, the change in his body was dramatic.
Mhm.
I mean, he looked like he put on 50 pounds of muscle. He looked like a completely different guy. Now, Bill Pearl has always downplayed his use of steroids. And I asked him about that once because I knew him. And he said to me, he didn't want people to get the impression he was a heavy steroid user, because a lot of young guys like me, he knew that I admired him. He says they might start taking drugs themselves, and he didn't want them to get sick, which is, I understand that. But
Mhm.
again, it started around 64 in bodybuilding.
Mhm.
Mid 60s, it was widespread. And then it just grew and grew and grew. And, more and steroids were introduced, both oral and injectable. They had the nandrolones, the various testosterones, Winstrol, Anavarro. These are oral steroids,
Mhm.
Anadrol 50. They were all developed in the 50s. And again, by the I'd say the mid 60s, widespread use in bodybuilding. That's when it really started. Yeah.
Okay. And so like, yeah, I know like in the 70s in the golden era, like even Arnold Schwarzenegger, he admits now that he had dabbled in it, nothing to the degree of what people are taking today. But let's just kind of fast forward this timeline a little bit. So steroids were legal. There wasn't really much anything stopping professional bodybuilders from using it until 1990. Can you talk a little bit about what happened there?
Okay. What happened was as I said, the steroid use grew and grew. And then they even started using growth hormone around 1980 or so. Bodybuilders started using growth hormone.
Mhm.
The original form of growth hormone was actually extracted from cadavers,
Mhm.
cadaver pituitary glands. But there was a problem because some of these pituitary glands were contaminated by an organism called a prion, which if you ingest it or use this particular growth hormone, if it was contaminated with prions, you'd get this brain disease called Creutzfeldt-Jakob disease that would basically destroy your brain completely, and horrible, horrible death. So they developed a recombinant form in 1985. That's still the form. It was made from recombinant DNA process using bacteria, recombinant DNA, they called it. That's the growth hormone available now. But the widespread use of steroids actually trickled not just bodybuilders, but
Mhm.
all athletes. started
Yes,
using it.
across the board.
Across the board, you name it. I was shocked to find years ago, I still boggles my mind. I was reading that people who were professional bowlers were taking steroids, and even, get this, chess players. Why would you need to take steroids playing chess? I don't know, but they were using it. So,
Yeah.
but the controversy really reached a pitch when, pardon the pun, when baseball players, it came out, one of the baseball players whose name is Canesco, his name was, I think, Jose Canesco, if I remember correctly.
Oh, Canseco.
Canseco, that's right, you got it. He wrote a book basically exposing the widespread use of steroids by baseball players. And so, then a kind of obscure, I guess he was a senator, he got really angry about it. His name was Joe Biden.
How ironic.
Yeah, he took on a personal journey to try and curtail steroids, and he was one of the sponsors of a bill called the Anabolic Steroid Control Act of 1990, which was signed into law by the original George Bush, the father, George. I guess it's George H.B.
George H. Yep.
Yeah, George H.W. That he signed it into law in 1990. So that was meant to curtail the use of steroids and that's when steroids became hard to get. In other words, they put restrictions on MDs giving out prescriptions. For example, if you go to a doctor and you want a prescription for a real steroid, and I use real because most of the steroids used today are from underground labs. They're not real. Well, I shouldn't say that. They're not quality. You don't know if they're real. Let me rephrase that. So to get a steroid today, it requires a triplicate prescription from a doctor, and this is from that law. One of the prescriptions goes straight to the Drug Enforcement Agency, and they monitor. If a doctor, MD, gives out too many prescriptions for steroids, they'll investigate it for a couple of months. If they find that he's giving them out like that, he could lose his license, and that's it. His career is done. So because of that, that was the birth of the underground steroid internet industry, which still exists today.
Yep.
This is the main source of steroids today are from underground labs on the internet. Very few doctors will give out prescription for the reasons I said. Anyway, it was followed by two further amendments to the law. I can't remember, I think it was 2004 was the next one. And the 2004 amendment to the Steroid Control Act was the control, because they started selling supplements in the 90s. Originally, it was something like androstenedione, which is a natural, it's classified as a steroid. It's produced in the body. It's along the pathway to produce, it's one step away from being turned into testosterone in the 5 steps that convert cholesterol to testosterone. That came out in supplement form in the late 90s. In fact, Mark McGuire was going for the home run record. I forget what year, 96, 97. And one day the reporters were interviewing him in the locker room. He opened up the locker and they noticed the bottle there, and it said androstenedione. And they said, "Mark, what is that?" He says, "It's a food supplement. It just helps me recover." And they did some research and they found that it was basically chemically a steroid, even though it was legal. It was legal. It wasn't a drug, it was legal at that time. And so, that led to, it turned out androstenedione was not that effective, because it is only effective if it was taken in larger doses. The problem is, as soon as you started taking larger doses, instead of having testosterone, it would be more readily converted to estrogen into men, which is not considered desirable. Nobody, breasts are nice in women, they're not in men. But
yes. And bodybuild, not good on bodybuilders either.
Not good. Yeah, it's called gynecomastia is the medical term. There's a pejorative term called bitch tits, which I don't like to use that because it makes not very respectful to women, but it's called gynecomastia. Anyway, the thing is, that wasn't effective. So there was a book called Anabolic Steroid. I can't remember the full name. It was written by a guy named Julius Vida, Vida, in 1968. But the book had, remember I told you thousands of steroids were developed in the 50s by major pharmaceutical companies. Most of them were not released because animal studies showed there was problems. They were toxic to the liver, or they didn't work as well, or the third category was they worked, but they were no better than the steroids that were already on the commercial market. They were never released, but they were in this book. The structures were in this book. So if you knew steroid chemistry, if you're a steroid chemist, you could make these. And that's what happened. Steroid chemists, they got aligned with a couple of supplement companies. They started selling these dead steroids, if you want to call it, these steroids that were never introduced. They started selling them as testosterone boosters. Now, the problem is there was a reason why the drug companies didn't release them, because a lot of them were very toxic to the liver, the oral steroid. And what happened, sure enough, some guys started getting liver problems, and a couple of guys had needed liver transplants. Some guys supposedly were getting prostate problems. Anyway, after a while, the FDA started to get all these adverse reports, got back to the government, and then they made an amendment to the 1990 law. In 2004, they banned any these new kind of so-called pro-hormones. They banned these steroid-based, which were actual steroids. They were not, they were illegal because they were drugs. They shouldn't have been allowed. Then, but the market was so lucrative by then because all these men wanted, they didn't want to take steroids, but they wanted higher testosterone levels. There was a tremendous market for them. So now the supplement companies started developing even more obscure steroids they brought out. And again, it took a couple of years, but 10 years later, 2014, they passed still another anabolic steroid. This one was much more inclusive. And it just basically, to make a long story short, it listed every known, let's say, testosterone booster that was based on steroids. It listed in the law, making them totally illegal. And there was a clause in there that said that any supplement introduced in the future that directly raises testosterone is automatically illegal. And if you sell it, it's punishable by 10 years in prison and $150,000 fine. So, what happened after that was now we get to the present day. Most of your so-called testosterone boosters are based on the one legal steroid that's still sold called DHEA, dihydroandrosterone, which is also an adrenal steroid. As a matter of fact, most women, the testosterone that women produce is actually made from androstenedione and DHEA. That's where they get their testosterone from. It's converted by certain enzymes. So what they did now is they manipulated the DHEA structure to produce supposedly more powerful testosterone boosters, because DHEA is not very powerful as a testosterone booster. It is in women. Strangely enough, it works in women, not men. Probably because, women's bodies are more geared to converting DHEA into testosterone. And men, it more or less turns it to what they call dihydrotestosterone, which is not that good. But anyway, that's what exists today. You have the herbal testosterone. Most of them don't work, to be honest with you.
Right.
There's one, in my Applied Metabolics publication, I did an article on herbal testosterone boosters. I covered every single one of them on the market. I listed the medical research behind them, if there was any. And I came up with only one that actually worked. It was called Tongkat Ali, also known as long jack herb. It comes from Malaysia. And if a man is low in testosterone, he has to be already low. A young man, old man, makes no difference. It will bring up your testosterone to normal levels, not super physiological levels like the drugs do, but it'll bring up to normal levels. That's the only one that really works. And these things are expensive. They're like these testosterone. They're like $70 a bottle, and they're basically placebos. I mean, they don't really work except for Tongkat Ali. That's the only one that really works.
Okay. So I guess like an obvious question is, why didn't, they had the 1990 Steroids Act, but why does the elite bodybuilding just don't test, or they look the other way? Like, what is the obvious reasons for that?
Okay, there is an obvious reason. What happened was bodybuilders started to get side effects, towards, let's say, the late 80s. A lot of them were showing up on, standing there on the, on the stage with these obvious big lumps on their nipples, which was kind of comestia. It became very noticeable. A couple of Mr. Olympias even showed that. So, there was a kind of a demand that, you got to do something about this steroid use. And this is mainly in the professional ranks, but also included the amateur ranks. So in the late 80s, Bodybuilding Federation, IFBB, actually banned, they wanted to see the guy who ran the IFBB, his name was Ben Weider. He had this burning desire. He wanted bodybuilding to be in the Olympics. And the Olympics had banned steroids way back in 64 after the Tokyo Olympics. So he tried to follow suit. So he said, the Olympic official told him, look, we'll never let bodybuilding in the Olympics as even a spectator sport unless you ban steroids. And so he did. In the late 80s, he banned steroids. And at the 1986 World Bodybuilding Championships, that's the first time they did the drug testing for steroids. The top four guys in the heavyweight all got eliminated because they failed the drug test. And the fourth place winner won the heavyweight class. His name is Rolf Mueller. He's 6'7" from Germany, one of Arnold Schwarzenegger's best friends. He won the heavyweight class by default. And this happened a couple of times. Bodybuilders started getting busted on the ranks and the amateur ranks, including they started the amateurs. I remember covering one contest, I think it was in North Carolina, a USA bodybuilding contest, where the female bodybuilders, about 11 of them didn't pass the drug test. They were there in the pre-judging, they weren't there at night. So I went up to one of the judges and I said, what happened to so-and-so? And I mentioned these girls' names. I said, did they fail the drug test? She says, that's personal information. I'm not going to give that out. I said, well, what's the purpose of the drug test if you're not going to tell who failed? I said, besides which, I could see they're not here. You don't have to be a genius. I mean, why wouldn't they be here?
Right.
But anyway, it was ridiculous to even talk to her any further. So, that's what happened. And finally, in 1990, this is interesting, 1990, the Mr. Olympia, the premier professional bodybuilding contest, was held in Chicago. This was the first drug-tested Mr. Olympia. And they made it known in advance. So all the guys knew they were going to be tested. I know what happened was, sure enough, I think about 4 guys failed the drug test. And these were a lot of body, but these were top guys. These were the best of the best. About 4 of them failed. But what was noticeable was all the other guys that did compete, their physiques were not the same. They were in great shape, and they were still better than most other bodybuilders. But let's say the finish, the kind of look they had previously was down a little bit. So after the contest, I interviewed the guy who was head of the professional division. His name was Wayne D'Amelia. I interviewed him, and I said, Wayne, it's great that they're doing the drug testing. This will preserve the health of the guys. I'm glad that, it's instituted. And he looks at me, says, he said, turn off your tape recorder. So I did. He says, this is off the record, but we're not doing it anymore. I said, what do you mean? We're not drug testing.
Yeah.
I said, why? He says, Jerry, the fans want to see freaks. And if they don't have a freaky look, they don't come, and there's no contest.
Yeah.
So there's no more drug testing. And that was the first and only drug tested professional.
Yeah. It's going back to the P.T. Barnum's playbook. He knew how to put together a sideshow, a freak show, and it brought the crowds. And right now we're in this monster era that was, I guess the game changer was Dorian Yates in the 90s. He brought a whole new, bigger Hercules type of physique to the stage. And ever since that, it's just gotten bigger and bigger. And a lot of it is because of the PEDs. That's why.
Just want to tell you a quick story. I don't know if you ever heard it real fast about P.T. Barnum. As you said, P.T. Barnum had this museum in New York, had oddities. He had all these fake, the fake mermaid and all the two-headed man, he's a con artist. He had all this stuff. Yeah. And it got so popular that people couldn't walk in there. And he had to figure out a way to empty out the place, so it wouldn't be so crowded. He was afraid there'd be some sort of, stampede or something. So he put a big sign on the door. It said, "This way to the egress." And egress means exit out. So as soon as they walked through the door, they were out of the building. Oh my gosh. And he was able to clear it up. But I just wanted to throw that in. But you're right. Dorian Yates, he was the first, if you want to call it, monster. And I don't use that word to put down. I know Dorian. I'm not saying in a pejorative sense. It's just that he was just a massive. he just set a whole new standard. I mean, there's been different standards in bodybuilding. For example, in the 80s, a couple of guys started showing up with muscle striations on their gluteus. That's the butt. I mean, they had striations, and suddenly it became a standard. In other words, if you turned to the back and you didn't show striations, you didn't place high. So, you know, once the standard is set, it's like a precedent. And Dorian Yates' physique set a precedent. And then he was followed by, of course, this guy, Ronnie Coleman, who was even bigger. I mean, this guy was 5'10" and competed at 296 pounds at 5'10". So, I mean, you know, and today it's crazy. I mean, I don't, I mean,
Today's big Rami at 325 pounds, and he's like 5'9" or 5'10", something like that.
Exactly. He's also a 300 pounder. He's the incumbent Mr. Olympia. He's won it twice, I believe. He's going for his third. There's two other guys. I can't. One of them is I always remember a young guy.
Nick Walker.
Nick Walker, right? And there's still a third guy who just actually qualified. He won a.
Brandon Curry.
No, this is a guy from Europe. Bald guy. His arms are so big that his head looks like a little peanut. That's how big his arms are. It's huge.
It's obvious.
So this is going to be truly a battle of the giants.
Between these. Yes.
But you know, the thing is that you look at, just to pick one out of the hat, Ronnie Coleman, who most people agree was, you know, the gargantuan Mr. Olympia. Even these new guys can't match the way Ronnie Coleman looked when he was at his best. He was just incredible. He was not only huge, he was very strong. I mean, just an absolute freak. Now, Ronnie Coleman, it turns out, liked to lift very heavy weights year round, never took a break. And as a result, he had all kinds of spinal problems. He had 12 surgeries. A couple of them went wrong. They left pins in his body, this and that. And, you know, if you look at Ronnie Coleman today, he's not that old. He's in his 50s. I mean, he's working out. He's pretty good, if I say so myself. But you look at him today, he's a shadow of himself. I saw a video recently where somebody asked him a question, how big your arms? And he goes, oh, I'd say about 19. And I'm looking at this up and said, that's a 17-inch arm at the most. I don't know why he's saying they're 19, but my point being that, you know, he paid the price. And my further point is that guys like Nick Walker, who I don't know, never met him, I wish him well. I'm not trying, all of these other guys, I don't know, like I say, I'm I dropped out of it a quarter of a century ago, so I don't know these new guys, but I don't feel comfortable about the future health of these guys. I always look at the health aspects.
Yes.
I have an idea what these guys are taking to get that big. And I'm going to give you a flat statement. There's no way they can't severely injure themselves or hurt or harm their future health by the drug regimes. There's absolutely no way around it.
Yes.
I that they survive. I mean, Dorian seems to be doing pretty good. I mean, he dropped his weight all the way down. He looks healthy. He's into yoga now. But I don't know what's going to happen with these guys. I don't know. I really couldn't say.
So let's talk about some, and this is all speculation. Obviously, we're not their coach. We're not their doctor. We don't know what they're taking. But if you had to assume, what would the like top 5 PEDs that they're on at the elite level, what would you say?
Well, I know for sure that most of them take growth hormone, right? Growth hormone, they're on a favorite oral steroid is called trenbolone.
Can you say what trenbolone, what it does and what the side effect is of that real quick?
Okay. Trenbolone is a oral steroid. It's favored by champion bodybuilders because it cannot convert into estrogen. Some of the steroids go through a process like testosterone itself. There's an enzyme called aromatase, which converts testosterone into estrogen. The problem with estrogen is not just the gynecomastia, but in a highly conditioned bodybuilder, estrogen retains water under the skin. It obscures muscular definition, and it also favors a light layer of fat, subcutaneous fat, which also obscures. So in other words, it makes you smooth. That's the term. Trenbolone is an extremely powerful steroid that they only marketed very briefly, and then they removed it from the market. But it's actually the most powerful oral steroid available. I talked about this in a couple of, it's only available from underground labs. No legitimate,
Counterfeits, right?
totally counterfeit. There's no legitimate drug company that makes it, and
Mhm.
there hasn't been one in years. When the drug company took Trenbolone off the market, they made it, it's still available in one form. Even today, it's a veterinary steroid. They
Mhm.
sell it in pellets.
Mhm.
They're called Fitojet that they inject in cattle to
Mhm.
increase the muscle weight of the cattle.
Mhm.
So bodybuilders started grinding down the pellets and making and putting them into injections and injecting
Mhm.
themselves with pellets.
Mhm.
The problem is when you're using a veterinarian steroid, it's not designed for human use.
Mhm.
There could be additives in there that you don't know what they're going to do to you. Well, that's the first
Right.
problem.
Right.
Then, of course, later on, see the underground black market steroid internet companies, they had steroid chemists that were actually making direct Trenbolone, right? The problem with Trenbolone is it's very hard on the liver. It's very hard on your cardiovascular system.
Mhm.
Uh, it puts you in a profile that is directly like a direct pathway to having a
Mhm.
heart attack, stroke. But the worst thing about Trenbolone, and this is what I talked about, preliminary animal studies show it causes changes in the brain that favor an increased production of abnormal proteins, specifically tau, TAU, and beta amyloid. These are the same two proteins
Mhm.
that are the cause of Alzheimer's disease.
Mhm.
What am I saying? Now, the way bodybuilders usually take steroids is they get on and off it. They call it cycling. They get on
Mhm.
and off it. But there's been a trend in recent years of what they call coasting,
Mhm.
where you rather than and they use like high dosage programs before a contest,
Mhm.
but rather than get off the steroids completely, they stay on low doses with the
Mhm.
belief that the low doses are safe. No, not true. That's completely false.
Mhm.
They There's no such thing as a drug that doesn't cause damage or side effects.
Mhm.
If you get off steroids, most of them, any abnormal changes like in the liver and the
Mhm.
blood lipids, your body, if you get off them, give yourself time, the body will revert back to normal values.
Mhm.
However, if you stay on low doses, you never give your body a chance, and now
Mhm.
you're getting real bad territory. So I don't know what's going to happen to these guys taking Trenbolone, but
Mhm.
there's a Anadrol 50, which is called oxymethylone.
Mhm.
Uh, they still have Anavar. It's not available as Anavar. That's an oral steroid considered to be a little milder.
Mhm.
Today it's called, it is still sold legitimately. It's used to treat people with HIV to
Mhm.
maintain mass, because when you have HIV, as soon as you lose lean mass, it's a sign that you're almost heading for death.
Mhm.
So you maintain lean mass. So they give them this drug, oral steroid that used to be called Anavar. Today it's trademarked as Oxandrin, and it's actually still sold. If
Mhm.
doctors, in
Okay.
fact, a lot of AIDS patients, knowing that bodybuilders like the drug, will sell the bodybuilders their Oxandrin,
Interesting. Interesting.
because, because a
Yeah.
lot of doctors, will see a big bodybuilder walk in the office. He says,
Mhm.
"Doc, I want to get a prescription for Oxandrin." Nope,
Mhm.
because know that if they keep doing that, that
Mhm.
DAA will be alerted, they
Yep.
won't do it. But
Yep.
so they get it from the HIV patients. So
So,
that,
so
go
like
ahead.
the top five is the growth hormone, the trenbolone, the testosterone. What would be the other two you'd be in the top five?
Well, like Anavar, Winstrol, there's many others. A favorite one is called halotestin, which is an interesting steroid because that's considered that they designate certain steroids produce what they call a harder look.
Mhm.
In other words, if you take
Mhm.
it before a contest, it makes you have that very hard, you look like
Mhm.
you're carved out of stone look,
Yeah.
supposedly, because of the way it affects body fat and all this and that. Halotestin's one of them. It's an
Mhm.
extreme, it's also a toxic steroid, especially to the liver.
Mhm.
Interestingly enough, one of the people that used halotestin was not a bodybuilder. Maybe you heard of him. His name was John F. Kennedy. He, he was a president. I can't help laughing.
Yeah.
John F. Kennedy had a
Mhm.
disease called Addison's disease, which
Mhm.
is a failure of the adrenal glands to make
Mhm.
cortisol. As a result, he had to take huge doses of cortisol. Now,
Mhm.
cortisol is the opposite of steroids. Instead of building muscle, it breaks down muscle.
Mhm.
So his doctor prescribed remember, steroids were a lot easier back then. Of
Mhm.
course, he was president, so you can get him
Get
anyway.
anything, yeah.
He was taking no less than 3 different anabolic steroids,
Mhm.
haloperidol, testosterone propionate, and I
Mhm.
think he was taking one called Winstrol. And by
Mhm.
the way, Winstrol, in its veterinary form called Winstrol V, is also a popular steroid with
Mhm.
today's bodybuilders. Yeah.
So let me ask you about synthol and
Synth-
what it does and what are your thoughts on it
yeah.
in modern professional bodybuilding?
Okay, synthol was originally developed by a German guy. He wasn't a doctor or scientist. Basically, it was a medium chain triglyceride, and you would inject it in you, and it had also included a little bit of what's the name of that lidocaine,
Mhm.
because it was painful to stick, inject it in the muscle. So he put a local anesthetic in there, and it was called Pump and Pose was the original.
Pump and pose.
And it was marketed, say, the original marketing was take this and it'll pump up your muscles
Mhm.
more than you could possibly believe.
Mhm.
But then, what it did is it kind of stuck oil in the muscle. It temporarily, blew up the muscle a little bit,
Mhm.
made it a little bit bigger. Since then, they've come out with various. They've had guys down in South America who actually, inject paraffin in their
Mhm.
muscles to pump up them. I mean, these guys are grotesque.
Oh yeah,
If
I've
you
seen
look
the
at,
pictures. Yeah.
I can't. I have to turn away. I mean, they're like
Mhm.
Frankenstein monsters. I
Yeah.
mean, they're insane. These guys. So basically, it's to give it a lot of times if a muscle is lagging, even
Mhm.
though sometimes the muscles just because of genetic reasons don't respond. So they'll inject something like
Mhm.
synthol to the muscle,
Mhm.
which gives it a temporary size
Yeah.
increase. Then they compete. It looks like they have,
Yeah.
the more popular
And
muscle is calves. The gastrocnemius is a very tough muscle to develop for most people, unless you have a
mhm.
genetically, like Dorniak's a gigantic calves, but most
Yeah.
body don't. So a
Yeah.
lot of them reject others. For a while, were actually putting in calf implants, surgical calf implants.
Yes. So is there
Yeah,
any cheating in professional bodybuilding? It sounds like it, I mean, honestly, if you had the best doctor, he could just like do all the surgeries, give you the chest implants,
yeah.
everything. So it's
Well,
not, is there any cheating in bodybuilding?
well, I mean, first of all, steroids right off the bat is cheating
Yeah, but there's no
because
testing. There's no,
yeah, there's no
rules.
testing. But theoretically, they are illegal in bodybuilding
Yes,
companies.
yes.
Just that it's not enforced. But the thing is, as far as the implants go, a couple of guys tried that route. Not pec implants. The pecs are they're not that hard to develop for most men. So you
Okay.
don't. The guys who get pec implants are usually not bodybuilders. They just want a
Okay.
more impressive chest. They even have fake abdominals now. They
Mhm.
put these
Oh, they have the
abdominal
etching. They can etch a sketch.
they have actually abdominal etching plastic surgeons can do.
Hmm.
This is for people that don't want to diet or exercise.
Yep.
Now, quite a few bodybuilders did try the calf implant route.
Hmm.
The problem was that they were very artificial looking. You could spot them
Mm.
a mile away. In fact, there was one guy who I know of who was a top elite bodybuilder who actually lost a professional bodybuilding contest. He was the best guy in the show, and he lost. He got
Hmm.
second. I asked the head judge afterwards. I said, "How come this guy didn't win? He was clearly the
Hmm.
best."
Hmm.
He says, "Jerry had those calf implants. They were like neon lights. It was so
Hmm.
obvious. He couldn't give it to him. He was fake. He was cheating. That was the words he used. The guy lost the contest because they considered that cheating." And I'm thinking
Okay.
to myself, what about all the steroids? That's okay. In other
Yeah.
words, you're going to throw this guy out because he has the implants, but
Yep.
steroids are okay. That seems a
Hmm.
little hypocritical to me.
Me too.
So Lou Ferrigno, he had some calf implants when he returned to bodybuilding. Later in his life, he tried to compete in a Mr. Olympia. He put in, and there was a couple other famous bodybuilders, but they kind of fell out of favor because
Well, you got
the
synthol now and those types of things, right?
yeah, exactly.
Hmm.
Now it's what they call what do they call that? Local enhancement. I can't
Hmm.
remember the exact term where they use
Hmm.
synthol injections to blow up, and you get weird effects. Now the worst guys are those South American guys who look like freaks.
Yes, yes,
But
yes.
the pro bodybuilders sometimes they'll put a little too much, like one guy, a top guy, put too much in his shoulders,
Hmm.
and he could where on his rear deltoid over here, it looked like he had a big tumor sticking there.
Yep. Yep. It
That
looks
was
so weird, you know, when
yeah,
it's superhuman huge,
yeah.
which brings
That,
me,
that that's
I'm sorry.
it's still in widespread use.
Yes.
That's what. Yeah.
So that brings me to my next question, which is the future of bodybuilding. What can we expect to see, you know, in the next 10, 20 years? Are we going to see, for example, 400 pounds being the norm on the stage? Is the mass monsters just going to keep getting bigger? What do you predict in the future?
Okay, now a couple of years ago, as the guys got bigger and bigger, people couldn't relate to them anymore. Men, women that were interested in bodybuilding, they'd look at these monsters and say, "No, I'm done. I can't." And with the people that promote bodybuilding, I'll give you a frank statement. I'm not gonna pull any punches. The people that run bodybuilding have zero interest in the health of bodybuilders. All they
Right.
interest in is money. They collect
Mhm.
fees from the competitors to compete. They collect fees from the promoters.
Mhm.
That's their only interest. They couldn't give a crap less about the health of these bodybuilders.
Mhm.
Just like that guy I told you about who said, when with stopping the drug test because they want freaks. He doesn't care. That's the way it is. But
Mhm.
so what they did is they came out. This is kind of humorous. They decided to create new divisions that would have size limitations. In men's bodybuilding, they created something called men's uh, uh, men's bodybuilding, I think it's called, where the guys actually compete in board shorts, Bermuda shorts
Oh
that go
yeah.
down.
Yeah.
Their thigh development is completely obscured, which is crazy.
Yeah.
Old time bodybuilders who competed like myself here,
Yeah.
we look at this and it's mind boggling because
Right.
the thighs are the biggest muscles in the body. This
Mhm.
should be like a boxer competing in handcuffs. It doesn't make
Yeah.
any but the thing is, these guys, if you look at them, most of them are muscular guys with great abs.
Mhm.
They have like male model type bodies,
Mhm.
the type of body a lot of women like, you
Mhm.
know, and the thing is they have size limitations. In other words, if you compete in that show and you're too big, you get marked down.
Mhm.
Strange, just the opposite of the open pro. You get
Mhm.
marked down. You come in there with a big monstrous physique, you're going to place dead last. It's
Yeah.
right there in the rules.
Yeah.
So then they created another division called classic physique. Now
Mhm.
this is based on the physiques of when I competed, the 70s,
Mhm.
60s, 70s, 80s, where the guys were much smaller and had symmetry, proportion, all that. And they don't wear the little jock strap, which, geez, I tell you, to be honest with you, I mean, if I was competing, I'd be embarrassed to step on stage in that thing. They look like they're wearing jock straps. I
I'm
mean,
surprised they're not in thongs. I'm surprised we're not there yet.
well, I'll tell you, in the first Mr. America contest in 1940, a guy actually entered the contest wearing a jock strap. But anyway, the
Yeah.
point, all the ice is a famous photo of all the other competitors. They're standing there looking at the guy like, what? Anyway, so the thing is that the classic physique, they wear the same kind of trunks like Arnold wore and those guys from
Yeah.
that era. And it's a much smaller physique, again, size limitation. The guy who's the current incumbent title holder, a guy named Chris Bumstead,
Mhm.
believe it or not, I've met him. He's a nice guy, real nice
Mhm.
guy. He has unbelievably huge fan base.
Mhm.
He's so popular that he has his own supplement company.
Mhm.
And theoretically, and he's actually more popular. He's probably the most popular competitive bodybuilder today.
Mhm.
Not the, not Big Ramy, the Open Mr. Olympia, but
Mhm.
because Chris Bumstead has a more conservative physique, if you want to call it
It's more
that.
aesthetically appealing.
Much more aesthetic is it's little tiny waist. He's very
Mhm.
muscular. You know what I mean? He has that balance, and that's why he won, because he has balance
Mhm.
and symmetry. So that is probably the future of bodybuilding. I think what's going to happen is, I think what's going to kill men's open bodybuilding, like the one that Ramy holds the title of,
Mhm.
unfortunately, and I really hope I'm wrong with this, but
Mhm.
there is, like you say, there's a quest for bigger and bigger and bigger.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, there was a statement years ago. They asked this guy who was climbing Mount Everest, "Why do you climb Mount Everest?
Because it's
What's your
there.
reason?" Yeah, he says, because it's there.
Yeah.
In other words, there's a certain type of evolution in every
Yeah.
physical. And in bodybuilding, in the certain aspects, like it's size. In other words, when it first started, it was size, proportion, shape, and symmetry. Now it's definition and size. As long as you have the size and the definition, that's what you do. So there's going to be a quest to get bigger and bigger and bigger. Unfortunately, the only way, even if you have fantastic genetics, like Ramey has, you have to have, even with the drugs, you can't get that big unless you have a certain genetic type of profile.
So when you say genetics, you mean like the shoulders, the frame, the height.
Exactly.
I mean, there's a certain look that you have to come with.
It's a certain structure, wide shoulders, narrower hips, smaller waist, ability to develop bigger thighs. Having natural calves also helps.
Yeah.
You know, back development. You know, this is all, a lot of it's genetically, but you could develop it to a great degree. Anybody can.
Yeah.
But you know, unless you have the genes to have the, let's say, the super look, and yes, steroids will get you above beyond what you could build naturally. But in their quest to get bigger and bigger, I believe these guys are going to take more and more steroids.
More risk.
And as a result, I mean, there's been a controversy. People are noticing that more bodybuilders are dying like every week.
Heart attacks, kidney failure.
I mean, every time I go on Facebook, there's another dead bodybuilder.
Yeah.
Last week, this big guy from Europe died. He had a tremendous physique. He was 30. Well, no, I'm sorry. He was 44 years old. He's dead. I mean, you know, and some of the guys from years ago are also dying. They stopped. But the point is that I believe, unfortunately, that the trend that's going now is you're going to see more and more of these guys dying. And there's only two ways around that. The first way is they're really, really going to have absolutely required, and I've said this in previous videos, these guys are going to have to be forced to get medical examinations at least every 3 to 4 weeks, or else they'll be barred from competition. The good thing about this is if you detect medical abnormalities early enough, you could save somebody's life. Like, for example, just off the calcium coronary scans. I mean, you know, you could tell if a guy's heading for a heart attack. I mean, then they could, if worse comes to worse, they have to drop out of competition, give themselves a break, you know, but you'll save lives. But my feeling is that that's never going to happen because they don't care. In other words, the people that run bodybuilding, they don't give a crap if these, they'll cry, you know, you have my thoughts and prayers and all this crap. All they care about the money. They don't care for the men or the women. I saw a woman interviewed in a video. She had a so-called coach, and she reeled off of the drug program. This is a woman. She reeled off the drug program that her coach gave her, and my jaw dropped. It was the same program that a guy like Big Ramey. This is a woman, 140 pounds. She was lying on her back. She couldn't move. She said that she was in heart failure. She was 5 years old. She had to get a heart transplant. This is what's going to happen to these.
There has to be like a tipping point where, you know, the transparency is going to need to come to light, you know, more so. Right now, you can go online, you go in forums, you can find out, you know, drug protocols and shopping lists for, you know, all those types of things are available there. But as far as like this being a sport that is trying to get more mainstream than just a niche, I assume there's got to be better transparency of what's going on.
Well, what's going to happen to the men's open will probably be the same thing that happened to Miss Olympia. Now, Miss Olympia evolved in the same way.
Right.
Started out in 1980. The first winner was a woman named Rachel McLish from Texas, who had a nice athletic physique. She didn't have big muscles at all, but she looked very athletic. And that trend continued for a couple of years, all the way through to Corey Everson, who was muscular, but not massive, you know. Then you have Glenda Murray, who had a little bit more muscle, but still, you know, looked like a woman, and just a really muscular woman with nice deltoid muscles. She looked like a real athletic bodybuilder woman, you know, not really outlandish. Then, unfortunately, I don't want to mention names. Then it happened, the women's body, the same turn that men's body. The women got bigger and bigger, where you couldn't even, I mean, you couldn't even tell that they were women after a while. They had these big faces and square jaws. I mean, you know, some of them had male pattern baldness, for crying out loud. Hair like men. And the thing is, it got so bad that women themselves, other women, were disgusted. Men were just repulsed by these women. Now, I had to look at it from the point of view of bodybuilding. These women were phenomenal because they had tremendous, I mean, they took a lot of drugs, of course, but the amount of muscle they attain, it's much harder for women. You have to say, wow, look at the muscle on this woman. Unfortunately, from a commercial and aesthetic viewpoint, it was zero. It was down.
Yeah.
No commercial sponsors were interested. The
Yeah.
women couldn't get work. So eventually, I think it was 2014, I believe, they discontinued the Miss Olympia. It was gone. Then they started with these Miss Fitness and the other female divisions. They
Bikini.
still have, they still had a Fitness Olympia, I think it's called. Turns out about 2 years ago, a guy bought the Olympia contest. He also bought Joe Weider's magazines. A guy named Jake Wood, who was married to a hardcore female bodybuilder at one time, and he loves female bodybuilding. He independent. He inherited a lot of money. This guy, money to burn. He was actually putting out his own version of Miss Olympia called the Wings of Strength for a couple of years. Once he took over, he reinstituted the Miss Olympia. He brought it back, so that now it's back. But my point being that I think that this is going to happen to the Mr. Olympia, the Open Olympia. I think as more guys get bigger and bigger, and especially as you have a lot of illness and hopefully not like fatalities, it's going to kind of fade out where it might. I don't think, unlike the Miss Olympia, it'll be completely, they won't get rid of it because Wayne was right about one thing. There's a large segment of people that love seeing freaks, and they will continue to go to this content.
It reminds me of like the MMA. Remember when it was like cage fighting and no rules, and it was the wild, wild west. And then they kind of came in and they turned it around and they made it more safe, and they brought in, a marketing machine. And so I'm wondering if we're still kind of in the wild, wild west with these mass monsters. It'll reach its peak, and then it has to come in with more standard safety, wellness for the competitors and so on.
Well, what I predict will happen, like I say, I don't see them ever getting rid of the Mr. Olympia like they did with the Miss, because it still has
the popularity will go down.
Yeah, in other words, the popularity has already gone down a lot. In other words, the only people that really are into the Mr. Olympia are people that like the freak look. That's it. I mean, most people don't. I mean, if you're into the average bodybuilding fan, say, what would you like to look like Big Ramey? No way.
No. Would you like to look like Chris Bumstead?
Yes.
Absolutely.
Every time they say that, every time. The popularity is going down, but they'll continue to do this. But what's going to happen, in my opinion, is, they eventually, if there's, and again, I really hope I'm wrong about this, but if there continue to be medical problems with the open guys, these 296-pound guys walking around with, one guy has, what's his name of the guy you mentioned earlier?
Big Ramy?
No, the other guy.
Nick Walker?
Nick has the most ghastly varicose veins on his frontal. He says it doesn't bother him, but the thing is that if medical problems increase, where some of these guys are getting, God forbid, heart attacks, that kind of thing, they're going to have to institute mandated medical examinations, just like boxers. When I work with professional boxers. If a professional boxer gets knocked out, he has to have a mandatory medical examination, including an MRI, to see if he has brain damage. And if he gets knocked out twice, he gets suspended from fighting for a couple of months. That's probably going to be what's going to happen with Men's Open, meaning that these guys are going to have mandated medical examinations, and if they do get sick, they're going to be suspended until they could pass a medical. That's what I see the future of Men's Open bodybuilding. It won't die out because, again, a lot of people that like the freaks.
Yes, yes. Well, what about with all the the new science of genetic manipulation and
my God. Yeah, that's the future. The future of they use the word doping, right? But it's something called gene doping, And I always use in my Applied Metabolics, I wrote about they did a gene doping with rats, where they injected a gene. They injected a gene that basically produces an anabolic hormone called insulin-like growth factor 1. And these were older rats. These were rats that were equivalent of 65-year-old. No matter who you are, Big Ramey, all of us, get older, you're going to lose muscle, even if you continue working out. That's just the way it is. So, So they wanted to see if they could, they wanted to develop a medical treatment for a condition called sarcopenia, which is a loss of muscle related to age. So some scientists came up with this gene therapy where they injected a gene for IGF-1 into these rats. They used a viral vector. They attached it to a virus so it would get in the cell, in the DNA, in the actual cell. To make a long story short, it's amazing. I can't help laughing. These equivalent 65-year-old human of a human rat, their muscles reverted back to that of a 19-year-old. When a 19-year-old male, that's when testosterone peaks.
Yep.
Their muscles all came back, and this is the key point, their muscles became twice as big as they were before. When this news got out, the scientists, I think it was in Pennsylvania, he got besieged by coaches all over the country that wanted to volunteer their athletes to undergo gene therapy because, to get bigger muscles.
Yeah.
It's totally experimental right now.
Right.
In fact, they did start using other forms of gene therapy to treat medical conditions. Unfortunately, a couple of young women, I think it was, died. Things went wrong. I mean, when you're messing around with the genetic apparatus of cells, you could go, the wrong path can lead you right into cancer. So it's not perfected now. But you when you say the future, yes, I have to agree. Eventually, they will perfect gene therapy. There's other substances. There's substances that increase muscle speed. There's substances that increase muscle coordination. There's a protein called myostatin that prevents muscle growth. You could do a gene doping where you block myostatin completely. If you block myostatin, there's no limit on growth. God knows how a guy can get, especially one of these genetic freaks. I mean, like a cartoon. I mean, they already, so that's the future of, and eventually there'll be a time when people in the future will be saying, those guys use drugs like anabolic. Can you believe that?
Yeah.
Like we look at people who drove Model T cars, like they use that stuff. Are you kidding? How did you do that?
Yeah, it'll definitely be interesting to kind of watch how, the next 5, 10, 15, 20 years unfolds and where we'll be at, by 2050.
Yeah. I mean, like I say, I don't have a good feeling about the Open Men's Pro Olympia. I wish all the guys well. I don't know them from Adam. They don't.
I mean, they're pushing the limits, which is, I think there's some admiration to that because they're like frontiers, they're on the front line doing something, maybe something nobody else has done. So I give them kudos for that. It takes a lot of courage and strength and, the uncertainty. Most people want to know the certainty of things. So they're kind of operating it's a strange time to be alive, and it's a strange time for bodybuilding.
Yeah, well, you could say they're avant-garde. In other words, they're ahead of the pack. They're showing bodies. I mean, as a former bodybuilder myself, I have mixed feelings when I look at either the men or the women. I mean, the normal person part of me looks at them and says, "My God, geez, these guys. I mean, what are they doing to them? So they're out of their minds."
Yeah.
But the bodybuilder in me says, "Holy cow! Look at the muscle that Jerry Brainum has, or this other guy, or Nick Walker. I mean, geez, I could never get like that if I took a boatload of steroids." So the part of me admires these guys.
Yeah.
But the other part, the more sensible part, says, "I know what they had to do to get that. It's not good." That's the way I would look at it.
Well, we're getting here toward the end, and I was wondering if we could play like a little game where I give you a bodybuilder's name, and then you tell me the first thing that pops in your head about them. You can say pass or no comment if you want to. Okay, so here we go. First one, Sergio Olivia.
Best genes ever. The most genetic bodybuilder in history.
Okay, Arnold Schwarzenegger.
Probably the most successful and best overall professional bodybuilder, in my opinion, ever.
So he's the GOAT.
Yeah, he's the GOAT.
Lee Haney.
Lee Haney, the perfect Mr. Olympia, the guy who had it all: symmetry, proportion, you name it, balance. The last of the aesthetic Mr. Olympias, I call him, the guy people would still want to look like, and as a human being, a very good man, a family man, a religious guy, just a good person.
Dorian Yates.
first mass monster
First mass
during the,
method.
and also probably the most analytical of all the Mr. Olympias. This is a guy who
Yeah, very
analyzed
smart.
everything. Very smart. He analyzed it right from the start of his
Mhm.
bodybuilding career. He looked at, he analyzed what's the best way for me to train to meet my goals.
Mhm.
He set certain goals. When I first met Dorian, he had just placed second to in a contest. This was 1990. I interviewed him. I said, Dorian, what is your goals for the future? He said, I am going to be the Mr. Olympia of the 90s. He says, I'm going to win the Mr. Olympia throughout the
He
90s.
knew it. He knew it.
And
Okay.
he told me this before he ever won a single Mr.
Yeah.
Olympia. It's
Yeah.
amazing.
That is amazing. He manifested it for sure. Ronnie Coleman.
Ronnie Coleman, biggest, most gargantuan Mr. Olympia,
Mhm.
the most muscle of any Mr. Olympia
He's
by
the
far.
purest. For me, when I
Yeah,
think of
yeah,
it, he
yeah,
earned every single muscle up on there.
that's
He's
right.
not
Yeah,
an illusion like some of the
no,
others.
no.
Um,
Ronnie Coleman is a guy who did not need synthol, believe me.
right, right, exactly. Flex Wheeler.
Flex Wheeler, great guy, know him, he's a friend of mine. Probably one of the most beautiful physiques, if you want to call it that.
Symmetry. Mhm,
Symmetry, proportion, very round muscles and this and that.
mhm,
Just perfect. He had little narrow waist.
mhm.
This is a guy who could have won the Mr. Olympia several times. Unfortunately, he competed in an era when you had guys like Yates and
There
this
was so
guy.
much talent in his
Yeah,
era.
but
Mhm.
probably I'd say definitely the top three greatest bodybuilders of all time is Flex Wheeler. I'd put him up there. Yeah.
All right. Phil Heath.
Phil Heath, a fantastic bodybuilder, seven-time Mr. Olympia, uh, fan, absolutely great physique. A guy, to me, could have gone a lot further if he hadn't had he has an air of arrogance about him, unfortunately. I don't know Phil Heath personally. I met him once,
Mhm,
but he actually complimented me because I came up to him. They were putting a big picture of him in Gold's Gym.
mhm.
And I came up, I figured, I hadn't been around in years in the magazines or anything. I didn't figure he wouldn't know me. I said, and he had just won the Mr. Olympia 3 nights before.
Mhm.
And when he won the Mr. Olympia, they handed him the microphone, and he was engaged to a woman who was battling breast cancer.
Mm.
And he said, I want to thank my fiance, whatever her name was. He said she gave me the strength to train hard by her strength in fighting this disease. And he started crying as he was saying it.
Mm.
So the next line, all these people were calling him a pussy and no, you cry baby and all this crap.
Mm.
And that really got me angry,
Yeah.
So I saw him coming in Gold's Gym and I walked up to him and I said, hey, Phil, you don't know me. My name is Jerry Brainum. As soon as I said my name, Jerry, I've been reading your stuff for years, which really
Yeah.
took me back. I mean, I had not the kind. The guy knew he was the current Mr. Olympia.
Yeah.
I said, look, I put my hand on his shoulder. Look, I just want to tell you, it takes a real man of strength to show emotion like you do.
Oh,
And
absolutely.
don't pay any attention to what these idiot
Mhm,
trolls are saying about you. I think you're a good person. I
mhm.
said, and this, about 2 weeks later, I saw him in Gold's. This time he was just working out. And remember, I had met him. We had a little brief conversation, and he's walking. I said, "Hey, Phil, how you doing?" And he looks at me with a blank face. He says, "Do I know you?" That's
Oh
what he
my
said.
gosh.
So
Okay.
I didn't take it personally. Maybe he was
Yeah.
into. But the
Okay.
thing is, in his other statements, he tends to be
Yeah.
seems as arrogant. Anyway, go
Yeah.
ahead.
How about Sean Roden?
Oh, Sean Roden, tragic case. I got to know Sean Roden. Sean Roden. Oh, you know what? You know how we're talking about setting a standard. Sean Roden was a breath of fresh air in the pro ranks because he came around with a physique almost like Flex Wheeler,
Mm,
maybe a little bigger than Flex Wheeler. He had
mhm,
everything, but he had symmetry. But he had the size needed to win the Olympia, but he had everything else.
mhm.
And he won in 2018. He beat Phil Heath. Phil Heath was going for his 8th Olympia,
Right.
and I beat him. So
Right.
I got to know him. Unfortunately, he got in some legal trouble, and a lot of people turned
Yeah.
against him.
Yeah.
And I went up to him in the gym. I didn't know the guy, because remember I wasn't covering the contests anymore. I didn't know that he
Mhm,
happened to be training at the same gym. And I went up to him and I said, "Listen, Sean, I just want to let you know that, in my opinion, you're innocent until proven guilty. I don't like the
mhm,
way people, they took away, they tried to take everything away
mhm.
from the guy.
Yeah.
I
It
said
was during
that
that Me Too time where you were guilty before the court
exactly
case.
right,
Yeah, yeah.
right.
So let's
So
keep
anyway,
going. Yeah.
he was a very quiet, soft-spoken guy,
Mhm.
really nice man. If you got the number, go ahead.
Yeah. Nasser El Sambati.
An old friend of mine, Nasser.
Oh, wow.
Nasser was an extremely intelligent guy. A
Yep.
lot of people know this.
Yep.
He spoke, you ready for this? 7 languages.
Yeah.
7. And he
Yeah.
was very smart, very analytical, very funny if you got to know him too.
Yep.
You know, and the first time I met him was also in 1990. He
Mhm.
bombed out of that same contest, didn't make
Mhm.
the top 15. I
Mhm.
came back, it was in New York. I came back to California. He was sitting on a bench outside the gym.
Mhm.
You know, he said, the first thing he says to me, call me Jimmy. I don't know why he wanted to be called Jimmy.
He wanted an American name, maybe.
So I said, he said, I just want to say that, you know, I'm going to be back and I'm going to be a top pro. Remember, he didn't even place. And
Yeah.
then, and, you know, went on. He was, that's
Okay. Dexter Jackson.
Dexter Jackson, I don't know that well. You know, I've never really had a conversation with the guy, but he's a force of nature, a,
Yes.
a freak in a different way,
Yeah.
because he was still competing when he was almost 50 years old.
Yes. It's
And he was
impressive.
beating guys that were young enough to be his sons.
Yeah. It's so
He's
crazy.
a, he's a
Jay Cutler.
Jay Cutler, a guy I also know very well, 4-time Mr. Olympia. Jay is another smart guy. He huge guy, you know, but smart. He took he really promoted himself. He bought real estate in Las Vegas, a successful supplement company. He's a guy that is a good example of a combination of brawn and brain. That's
Awesome. We could go on and on with this list, but I'm going to go ahead and stop right there. It's been fun.
Well, let me put it this way: if you ask me about the new guys like Big Ramy,
yeah,
you get a blank look. I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know these guys at all.
yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So, just my last question is: any final thoughts on the future of bodybuilding?
I think what's going to happen is that the classic division, it's already becoming the most popular. It's going to be by far in the next 2-3 years. It's going to be the numero uno bodybuilding contest, and I think men's bodybuilding with the board shorts, even though I think it's a
Yeah.
little silly, that's going to be popular because it's
Yep.
relatable. These guys, you know, guys you could see along the beach. I mean, they're thin guys with good abs.
Yep.
So that's become more popular. The men's bodybuilding open, unfortunately, I see not a good future for that, because I think with the state of the drug usage there, unfortunately, again, for the umpteenth time, I hope I'm wrong. I think there's going to be more and more medical. It's inevitable with the drugs, especially with this idea of not getting off the drugs and staying. That's like Russian roulette, you know.
Yep.
That is only going to be even more so in the next couple of years. It'll only be a really niche freak spot where the only people interested will be absolute freaks for muscle size. That's it. That's it.
Awesome. Well, Jerry, I have thoroughly enjoyed chatting with you and learning from you. I do appreciate you coming on my channel today.
Sure. Nice talking to you.
Yes, yes. And if you guys like this video, be sure to give it a thumbs up and leave a comment down below. Maybe Jerry will hop on and comment. And don't forget,
I just want to mention this. You mentioned it also. My Applied Metabolics is really a good source of information for anybody that wants information about nutrition, exercise science, women's health and fitness. I cover everything. Hormonal therapy. I don't give out drug regimes. That's not my thing. I'm not going to do that. But just about everything else. And it's like 30 to 50 pages. Comes out. The first of it's not expensive at all, and it has my 62 years of experience in there. So it's extremely useful resource for anybody. You don't have to be a bodybuilder, even if you're interested in health and longevity. I cover a lot about longevity. It's a great resource. Just want to make it's www.appliedmetabolics.com.
Yes, yes. And I'll put it in the description box down below, but definitely there's so much crap on the internet. I would highly recommend, you know, a scientific source who's done their research. Jerry's has got a great website for that.
Thank you.
Yes, yes. So don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell to be alerted to when the next video drops. Thanks for watching.